All right, ready to dive in? Shaka Zulu. He's a figure who looms large in history, but how much of what we think we know is actually true?
That's the question, isn't it? We've got legends and historical accounts, but separating fact from fiction, well, it can be a challenge.
And that's why we're here. To dig into those sources, try to understand the man behind the myth. We've got a lot to unpack, so let's start at the beginning. What do our sources tell us about Shaka's early life?
Well, even his birth is shrouded in controversy. The illegitimate son, rising to become the most powerful ruler of his time. It's a story that has all the makings of an epic.
It does sound like something out of a movie, but you can imagine the challenges he faced, being born outside of what was considered acceptable back then.
Absolutely, and those challenges, they really shaped him. His very name, Shaka, it means, and this is a bit unsettling, bug or parasite. Can you imagine being given that name at birth? What that must have done to his sense of self?
Rejected before he even had a chance. It's
Yet
heartbreaking.
that sense of rejection, it's a recurring theme in his early life. Exiled by his own clan, facing constant disrespect. It's easy to see how that could fuel a desire for recognition, for power.
To prove them all wrong, right?
Exactly. And this is where things get interesting. He finds refuge with the Mithwa clan. It's there he meets King Dingiswayo.
Ding Sueo. Tell us more about him.
This is where Shaka's journey takes a turn. Dingiswayo becomes his mentor, shaping him into the warrior and the leader he would become.
So it's not just about raw talent, but also guidance and strategy.
Precisely. Shaka learns military strategy, organization. He's exposed to a different way of thinking about warfare.
He's like a sponge, soaking it all up.
Absolutely, and he thrives in this environment. Remember, he didn't have a father figure in his life, and it seems Dingiswayo, in a way, fills that void, providing guidance, shaping his ambitions.
That's an interesting dynamic. But then his father dies. What happens then?
Everything changes.
Hmm.
Shaka returns to the Zulu clan, but he's not the same boy who left. He's a warrior now, hardened by experience, driven by ambition, and he has his sights set on leadership.
And he's not afraid to take it.
Not at all. He overthrows his half-brother, solidifying his rule. It's a ruthless power grab, but it marks the beginning of a reign that would change the Zulu people forever.
Shaka's rise to power is certainly a compelling story. But from what I've read, it wasn't long before things started heating up between his mentor, Dingiswayo, and another powerful leader, Zwaid. Sounds like a recipe for conflict.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
These were ambitious leaders, each with their own visions of power. It was a clash that was almost inevitable, really. And for Shaka, it would become a defining moment.
Because it meant losing his mentor. The sources describe Dingiswayo's death as a real turning point for Shaka.
You can imagine the impact. It was a loss that fueled his ambition and, some argue, unleashed a ruthlessness that would become his trademark.
He unifies the Mfecane army with his own forces. It's like he's taking everything he learned from Dingiswayo and putting it into action on a grander scale.
He was a quick study, that's for sure. But Shaka wasn't content with simply maintaining the status quo. He was a visionary, a revolutionary when it came to warfare. He knew he needed to innovate to dominate.
And that's where the Ikwa comes in, right? This short spear that became synonymous with the Zulu warriors.
Exactly. He ditches the long-throwing spear for the Ikwa designed for close combat. It was a risky move, but it paid off.
I bet it did. But the Ikwa wasn't his only innovation, was it? He's also credited with developing a pretty unique battle formation. The bull's head.
Ah, yes. The bull's head formation. A stroke of genius, some would say. Imagine this. The Zulu army, 1,000 strong, arranged in the shape of a bull's head.
I'm trying to picture it. Go on.
The chest, comprised of the strongest warriors, would engage the enemy head-on, locking them in place. And the horns, those are the flanking units, swift and deadly, encircling the enemy before they even knew what hit them.
Wow, it's like a perfectly orchestrated trap. No wonder they were so successful.
It was a devastatingly effective tactic. Victories against larger armies, expansion of the Zulu kingdom, it all happened at an astonishing rate. But this rapid expansion, well, it came at a price.
Mfecane, we have to talk about that. It's a period of immense upheaval, displacement, and violence.
A direct consequence of Shaka's conquests. Imagine entire populations fleeing his armies, fighting for survival, caught in a whirlwind of chaos and bloodshed. It's estimated that 2 million people died during the Mfecane. 2 million.
A staggering number. It really puts the cost of Shaka's ambition into perspective.
It does. And sadly, as his power grew, so did his ruthlessness. He became increasingly tyrannical, his reign marked by a brutality that alienated even those closest to him.
It's a tragic turn, isn't it? How this drive for power, for control, seemed to consume him. Did anyone dare challenge him?
Well, they did. But crossing Shaka, well, it rarely ended well. There are accounts of executions, brutal punishments. He instilled fear, no doubt about it. But it also sowed the seeds of his own downfall.
Because those closest to him, they must have seen an opportunity.
Precisely. And in a Shakespearean twist of fate, it was his own half-brothers, Dingaan and Malangana, who orchestrated his assassination. 1828. Just like that, his reign was over.
Brought down by the very people he'd sought to control. It's almost hard to believe after all he'd accomplished, all that power gone just like that. What became of the Zulu kingdom after his death?
Imagine the power vacuum. The kingdom fractured. Dingaan takes control, but he's cut from the same cloth, you see. Brutal, paranoid. It was a tumultuous time, the Zulu kingdom weakened by infighting.
And then, of course, there's the looming threat of the British. They couldn't have picked a worse time to face that kind of imperial power.
No, they couldn't.
Heh.
But even with the odds stacked against them, the Zulus, they still clung to Shaka's legacy. His military innovations, they lived on in the Zulu warriors. And that brings us to the Battle of Isandlwana in 1879.
Isandlwana, where the Zulus, against all odds, handed the British a crushing defeat.
Imagine it. Thousands of Zulu warriors armed with Shaka's ikwas, those shields, charging into battle. It was a clash of two worlds, two completely different ways of waging war.
And for a time, at Isandlwana, Shaka's legacy, it triumphed.
It did. A stunning victory, but ultimately a short-lived one. The British, they were a force unlike any the Zulus had ever encountered. They would eventually regroup, their superior firepower and resources proving too much to overcome. The Zulu kingdom, it was ultimately absorbed into the British Empire.
A tragic end to a story that began with such promise, such ambition. It makes you think, doesn't it, about the legacy of leaders like Shaka, the brilliance, the brutality. How do we reconcile those two sides of his story?
That's the question, isn't it? Shaka Zulu, a figure who continues to fascinate and horrify in equal measure. He reshaped the map of southern Africa, but at a terrible human cost. He was a product of his time, yes, but also an architect of it. A reminder that history is rarely black and white.
Complex and compelling. I think that's a good place to leave it for today. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the life and times of Shaka Zulu. We'll be back again with another journey into the past.